It's a beautiful morning in New York and people are having fun in Central Park. Suddenly, the crowd begins to behave strangely. They repeat words, freeze in the middle of the street, or start walking backwards. At this point, several people start shouting, and, on a bench, a woman sees her friend whispering the same phrase several times before taking her bandage to sweep it into place. In the center of the city, a group of construction workers are taking a break when a body suddenly falls near them. At first the others think it's an accident, but soon another body falls, and when they look, they find that all the workers on the upper floors have also gone out to self-extinguish. One by one, they all fall to their deaths, their faces still soulless and emotionless. Meanwhile, science teacher Elliot. He told his class about the time that millions of bees disappeared across the country. A student says that there will always be events that science cannot explain and that we will never fully understand, to which Elliot agrees. The other students start talking to him. Excitement for mysterious events, but are interrupted when Elliot is called to a meeting of emergency personnel. On his way to the main hall, Elliot looks at the other classes and sees the students in shock. Something on their phones. After all the staff have arrived, the director explains that the city is in a state of emergency. Apparently terrorists released a strange gas in Central Park that it forces people to stop their activities. This led to the cancellation of classes across the city. Then the teachers go back to their classrooms and tell the students they can go. During the day, Elliot leaves with his best friend and fellow Professor Julian, whose mother is hysterical on the phone. Although he is in Philly and told Julian to bring his family. Julian and his Alma's wife is also invited, and Julian admits to Julian that Alma has been distant lately. At home, Elliot's wife, Alma, is nervous because she keeps getting calls from a person named Joey, who doesn't want to talk. She ignores her phone and watches the news to learn about all the people dying in the area and how New York has been evacuated. Soon, Elliot arrives and together they pack to leave town. The couple arrive at the station, where they meet Julian with his daughter Jessie. His wife got stuck in traffic at Princeton, so he had to take the next train. On the station's television, a reporter reports that the autopsies have revealed that the toxin is a natural ingredient. Julian makes a comment in reference to the couple's marital problems, and this angers Alma, who does not want her intimate details exposed like that. Meanwhile, in Philadelphia's Rittenhouse Park, a policeman is doing his best to keep the traffic jam under control. When the wind blows over the trees in the park, most of the people suddenly freeze and the policeman uses his gun to self-destruct. Then the taxi driver gets out, takes the gun and does the same. Then the gun is taken by a woman, who also uses it to finish things off. Back at Elliot's group, they're on the train and Alma finally answers Joey's call to tell him not to call again because they only shared dessert and it meant nothing. At that point, Joey tells them that the event is also happening in Philadelphia, and soon most people start getting calls from friends and relatives telling them that other cities like Boston are also affected. Eventually, the train stops in Pennsylvania and the workers inform the passengers that this is the last stop because all train service has been interrupted. They have also lost all contact, so there is nothing they can do to help. Nearby is a small rural town, so the crowd ends up in a restaurant. A woman takes a video from the Philadelphia Zoo that shows the man enter the lion's cage and be killed by the animal. On television, the journalists announced that the government withdrew the idea of a terrorist attack. The event takes place in the Northeast region and spreads to smaller cities. At that moment, the power goes out and people panic, so everyone rushes into their cars. Elliot and Alma try to call for help but are ignored by everyone. Luckily, an elderly couple who run a daycare center invite them to come with them, so Elliot and Alma call Julian. However, Julian has lost contact with his wife and wants to find her, so he leaves Jessie with Elliot and Alma, then leaves with a family in Princeton. Moments later, the pair stop at his house to collect supplies, and the man tells Elliot that he thinks it's the plants that release the chemicals that kill people. Meanwhile, Julian's group arrives in Princeton, only to discover that the area has also been infected. There are a lot of bodies hanging from trees on the side of the road and the girl in the car is panicking. So Julian makes them look and solve a math problem to distract her. As he speaks, he notices one hole in the roof of the car. Suddenly the car stops and, after a pause, crashes into a tree. Julian gets out of the car and uses the broken windows to self-destruct. Back to Elliot's group, they leave and hear on the radio that the latest theory is water pollution. When they, leaving the city and reaching the village, they find the road blocked by a pile of bodies. Then they start to back off. However, when they reach the intersection, they find cars coming from other roads, including an army truck. All drivers report that these roads also lead to many bodies blocking the road, meaning they are surrounded by toxins in all directions. Elliot, he tries to call Julia, but she doesn't answer, then notices that Alma missed Joey's calls like this. He asks who it is, but Alma answers no one. Hear people in other cars sharing that event. Still starts in the parks. Elliot thinks that maybe the plant theory is true after all. At that moment, the woman manages to contact her daughter in Princeton, who says that everyone in town is dead. The call ends when the girl suddenly dies and Elliot hears the wind blowing into the girl's room. Elliot then realizes that Julian is probably dead and has to break the news to Jess, comforting her depression. An army soldier and Elliot then agreed that since the attacks were happening in heavily populated areas, they should get off the streets. The crowd splits into two groups and begins to move through the countryside to reach a small nearby remote town that may be safe because it is still developing. As they walk, Alma finally tells Elliot about Joe. He was a coworker she had dinner with when she had to work late. Nothing happened, but he felt guilty for the lie and therefore left. Suddenly the wind starts blowing and the group freezes. Then the soldier returns and uses his weapon to self-destruct. Elliot's little group can hear the gun keep firing over and over, meaning that others, including the nursery couple, also use it to finish things. While the small group begins to panic, Elliot yells at them to shut up and uses a scientific method of deduction to analyze the evidence that has so far and has come to a conclusion. He believes that the toxin is really widespread. The plants, but it is encouraged only by large groups of people, so it must be divided into small groups. 3 small groups emerge and they all start running in different directions. Elliot, Alma and Jesse escape with 2 teenagers, but no matter how fast they move, the wind carries them away. Catch up soon. His group stops running to shield their faces and the wind blows around them, but luckily nothing happens. Elliot thinks this confirms that group size matters. After a lot of running, the group finally finds the small town and hides in a house where everything is fake it because it's for show. There is a plant in a room and Elliot slowly approaches, asking him to be well with them before he realizes it's a plastic plant and he's an idiot. After the break, they decide to leave before other people come and hide there and cause the toxin. While riding a hill, they see 2 groups arrive and form a larger crowd, which immediately causes them to freeze. Only one. The man moves to start a commercial sawmill, which kills him in seconds. Elliot's group continues to walk for hours and finds a radio in a fence. An emergency message informs people that they must go at the western borders to be picked up by the police. Eventually, the group is very tired and hungry to continue, so when they find a condemned house, they decide to stop there. While walking, Elliot makes up a story about an employee he flirted with and calms Alma down though. A lie, the group knocks on the door of the house but no one comes out. They try to force their way, but at that moment they see people entering. Elliot kindly asks for help, but when the owner refuses, the teenagers become aggressive and use foul language while shaking window panels. The owner gets angry and ends up shooting through a hole in the window, killing the 2 teenagers instantly. Frustrated, the trio started running again. Meanwhile, the survivors appear in different buildings in the neighborhood, take different options. Some wear masks while others collect as many weapons as possible. On television, a journalist interviews a scientist, which explains that the attacks are intensifying by the hour and affecting the groups smaller people. Moments later, Elliot's group finds a house with no electricity or dilapidated roads, so they assume it's abandoned. However, as they get closer, they meet Mrs. Jones, who many years ago chose to stay out of touch with the wider world. She agrees to let them stay the night and share the food, but she doesn't want to know anything about the incident and asks them not to talk. Miss Jones is a lot weird. One second she's cute, the next she's fighting Jesse's hand to get it, the cookies he gave himself. Later that evening, Elliot and Alma talk in low tones. Because Jesse is sleeping, Mrs. Jones hears them and accuses them of wanting to kill her. Steal it in the morning, Elliot goes to look for Mrs. Jones. Jones wants to tell him something and is shocked to find a scary doll in his bed. As he approaches, Mrs. Jones appears behind him and shouts at him, calling him a thief and ordering him to leave immediately. Then he goes into his garden, where the wind suddenly blows and pushes Mrs. Jones back. Elliot sees. He immediately hurried to close all the doors and windows, but Mrs. Jones began breaking windows rather painfully until she died. When the wind starts to blow, Elliot runs around the house trying to find Alma and Jesse. Somehow you can hear them, but they cannot find them. He thinks he hears them in the basement, but when he enters, he is alone. Alma and Jess are actually outside in an old stone house and a talking pipe connects the two. The palace's Elliot uses this tube to say that the toxin now appears to be caused by a person. After sharing some pleasant words and memories, Elliot decides he doesn't want to just die and leave. Soon Alma and Jesse also come out and they all hold hands as the wind blows around them. However, nothing happens and the trio returns home. Realizing this, the event is finally over. 3 months later, Alma and Elliot live happily together while raising Jesse. Alma also finds out that she is pregnant and Elliot is delighted with the news. On television, a scientist explains that the event was probably a message sent by the planet to warn humanity that it was causing too much damage and therefore, another attack should be expected soon. Meanwhile, in a park in France, People begin to freeze and scream as the wind blows around them.